Hello and welcome back. We are continuing on with this book, reading line number 19, Black Soldiers Fought to Defend the Confederacy. Adam H. Dumby, the historian who documented the manipulative use of pensions for aging whites in North Carolina, also investigated why several thousand blacks had received pensions during the early decades of the 20th century. Was it because they had taken up arms for the South during the Civil War? He wondered. His conclusion is firm. Black men and boys did not fight to defend the Confederacy. The lost cause tenet that claims they did is based on the fact that states like North Carolina actually did begin awarding pensions to previously enslaved blacks in the late 1920s. These grants supported elderly blacks who had worked for the Confederacy as the personal attendants of white soldiers or as manual laborers, not soldiers. Most had done so while enslaved. In recent years, Confederate enthusiasts have offered the existence of these pensions as evidence that there have been Black Confederate soldiers. Why else would they have earned pensions? They reasoned. This conclusion seems logical, but it is not supported by the facts. Plan administrators were clear when they began making their awards. North Carolina had recognized no Negro troops in the Confederacy, one official had noted. In other words, black men in the state had not served as Confederate soldiers, only as laborers, and the payments recognized their non-combat work. These pensions, just like the ones awarded to whites, weren't simply granted out of charitable kindness. They served as a form of white supremacy propaganda. Blacks who received them were presented as examples of past faithfulness to Southern whites, and they were expected to serve as models of similar loyalty to whites, including proper subservience. During Jim Crow segregation, it was hoped that the example of these figures would guide the behavior of other Black residents in their communities. The claim that there were Black Confederate soldiers is one of the newer tenets of the lost cause. Historian Kevin M. Levin has traced its origins to the 1970s. Multiple factors made it appealing and even necessary to create such a narrative at that time. By suggesting the existence of racial solidarity during the war, with whites and blacks fighting shoulder to shoulder against a common foe, the fabrication helped suggest that Confederate history was aligned with the nation's recent civil rights advances toward equality. Some of the Confederate enthusiasts who began to promote the idea may have believed their claims to be sincere. They may have jumped to this conclusion after hearing about Black pensions without taking the time to study the background behind the awards. Others may have willingly exploited the ambiguity in order to maintain the illusion that one could celebrate the Confederacy without being accused of celebrating racist beliefs. This fabrication served other purposes too, including as counterweight to the research of post-Dunning historians. New generations of scholars were systematically refuting past historical claims and in the process exposing the original tenets of the lost cause as racist propaganda. Their research documented the abusive nature of slavery, the monetary forces that had fueled it, the motivation behind the secession, the racism of the Confederacy, and the accomplishments of blacks during Reconstruction. The existence of Black Confederate soldiers was offered as a way to counter such revelations by suggesting that blacks had fought to support the Confederacy and been awarded pensions for doing so. Proponents of the lost cause could argue that racism had no place in the Confederacy. It was a remarkable claim given the numerous critical statements white Southern leaders had made about blacks at the time. As historian Adam Dombey has noted, most Confederate veterans would have been horrified at the claim that thousands of African Americans fought alongside them, let alone that the veterans believed in equality. And yet, that is just what a lie about Black Confederates has allowed contemporary defendants of the Confederacy to claim. In addition to conjuring Black Confederate soldiers out of thin air, supporters of Confederate heritage have also taken more moderate steps of commending the non-combatants who received these pensions. We are all brothers and sisters under one flag. Joe Fesperin, the leader of the local chapter of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, during the 2012 dedication of a memorial to Black Confederate pension recipients in Union County, North Carolina. These Black and white men, simply put, were 150 years ahead of their time, suggested another. White speaker at the event, the local assistant county manager, Matthew Dolk. In reality, the Union County pension recipients were not 150 years ahead of their time. They were survivors of enslavement who decades later were exploited to serve as role models of subservient behavior during the Jim Crow era of white supremacy. When their descendants are asked to participate in these contemporary celebrations of Confederate culture, they are unwittingly or not being cast to play the same parts as their ancestors, even if it were true that pensions had been awarded to Blacks for Confederate combat duty, which they were not. Such a circumstance would be insignificant when placed within the broader historical context. Hundreds of thousands of Blacks fled the South during the war, and some 200,000 of them fought against the Confederacy. 15 or more came from North Carolina's Union County, but are unmentioned on the new memorial. Nearly 40,000 Black soldiers died from combat, infections, disease, and other causes while defending the United States. These numbers help to put the celebration of 3,000 Southern Black pensioners into perspective. All right, so that was lie number 19. Black soldiers fought to defend the Confederacy. And we're going to go ahead and do 20 to round out the last one. Lie number 20, we erase history when we remove symbols of the Confederacy. A new tenet of the lost cause has emerged in recent years in response to the growing momentum for the removal of Confederate symbols from public spaces. These removals, the argument goes, amount to the erasing of history. This is a powerful claim. It accuses advocates for monument removal of censoring the historical record, a serious charge. This claim relies on the several types of logical manipulation. First, it muddies the distinction between history and heritage. Members of the Sons of Confederate Veterans and the United Daughters of the Confederacy are particularly adept at arguing for the preservation of the memorial established by their ancestors. They consider such commemorations to the representation of the Confederate history, when in fact they are actually constructions of Confederate heritage. There is a notable difference between the two. History is the record of actual events. Heritage is the collective memory an individual or group shares with its past. The latter may or may not be factually accurate. Today's sons and daughters are multiple generations removed from the war and from the era when most Confederate monuments were dedicated. Many members may well take such tributes as face value without recognizing the complexity of what they convey. Having been raised on flawed textbooks and surrounded by like-minded descendants of the original Confederates, they may easily be perplexed by the notion that the commemorations they have revered all their lives could be objectionable to others. Such symbols are, in their minds, equally valid representations of both history and heritage. The history that these statues actually represent is their use as tools of propaganda for the perpetuation of white supremacy during the era of Jim Crow segregation. The history that these statues represent is the political endorsement of the racist message through their strategic placement at influential public settings, such as entrances to the county courthouses. The history of these statues represent is their testament to the power exerted at the time by white heritage groups such as the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Sons of Confederate Veterans who helped install them. Ironically, the history that is at greatest risk of being erased by such removals is the history that the defenders of monuments to the Confederacy are least likely to admit, the evidence of a sustained propaganda campaign designed to ensure the supremacy of one race over another. That story can continue to be told by the documentation of such memorials, by the presentation of selected examples in museums where they can be properly contextualized, and by the creation stories of new monuments that are born out of the material remains of the old. The charge that the removal of Confederate monuments amounts to an erasure of history ignores another aspect of the situation, too. Most of the commemorations in question are located in on public property. The approval of such tributes, as long as a century or more ago, does not obligate today's mayors and town councils and school boards and presidents to accept them now. What a society chooses to celebrate evolves over time. Statues and other forms of commemoration are symbols that convey the priorities of the times. Just because something spoke to a community in the past doesn't mean that it will continue to do so. Public officials are obligated to honor the priorities of the people they serve, not those long dead. It is reasonable for them to withdraw the use of community spaces for displays that no longer resonate with the times. All right, and that was lie number 20. We erased history when we removed symbols of the Confederacy, and we have officially completed White Lies, How the South Lost the Civil War, Then Rewrote the History by Ann Bausum. Leave book recommendations in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.